When Prince George vanished in Balmoral's dense forest, one small signal guided a royal guard to him. The search party had passed the marker 3 times. Constance watched them do it from 10 feet back, where the November fog had been failing to thin for the better part of an hour, and the men in front of her were doing what men do when they are certain, moving with confidence in the wrong direction. She had come out with her father's kit when word reached the gamekeeper's cottage that the prince's hunting party had scattered in the early afternoon. Her father with a wrenched knee that had kept him from his work all week, her mother already shaking her head at the doorway as Constance pulled on her boots. She had not been asked to come. She had simply come because the Pharaoh family had kept these hills for 3 generations, and she had learned to read Balmoral the way other women learned to read music, slowly, then all at once, until the notation was indistinguishable from the thing itself. The Gillies were good men, the palace guards less so. The staff, imported from a London household, were making a great deal of noise in the manner of people who believed noise constituted a search. And none of them had stopped to look at the stones. 3 white quartz stones in a narrow V shape. The point of the V aimed downhill and east, a stalker's distress marker. Her father had taught her the pattern when she was 7, seated on a boulder above the Corey Beag with her knees cold, and her attention absolute because her father taught the way the hills demanded, without ornamentation, without repetition, with the understanding that the lesson was the only version of it you were going to get. She calculated the direction again. The V pointed east and down. She recalculated because the fog made distances unreliable, and her own confidence was something she approached the way she approached uncertain ground, with weight distributed carefully, testing before committing. Still east, still down. McAllister, the head gilly, had been leading the party north along the tree-line for 20 minutes. He was a careful man, experienced, reading the terrain the way he had read it for 30 years. He was also reading the wrong terrain. The prince had not gone north. She had known this before she crossed the garden gate at the cottage, and she had said nothing because she had also known what happened when a gamekeeper's daughter said something in a group of men who were already moving. The marker was 14 inches from the nearest boot. She stepped in front of the party. "You've walked past him 3 times. McAllister turned. His patience had a quality to it at that moment that was adjacent to irritation. Not unkind, simply occupied with other, more important calculations. Miss Pharaoh, the stones. She pointed with the economy her father had taught her. Not a wave at the general landscape, not a gesture that invited interpretation, but a specific indication of a specific thing. 3 white quartz. V pattern, point east downhill. He's in the Corey Beag gully." McAllister looked at the stones. One of the London guards looked at the stones, then looked at her, which was a different category of looking entirely. "That's a significant descent in this fog," McAllister said. "Yes." She did not elaborate. The elaboration existed in the stones themselves, if you knew what you were looking at. She recalculated the V's direction for the 3rd time, not because she doubted herself, but because standing still while someone else assessed her was a circumstance she had learned to manage through the application of useful tasks. East. Down. Same as before. The London guard opened his mouth. McAllister made a decision the way experienced men make decisions in bad conditions, without visible ceremony. "East," he said, to the group, not to her. They went east. The descent into the Corey Beag took 20 minutes on a dry day with good light. In this fog, with the path invisible past 6 feet and the ground soft from 3 days of sustained highland rain, it took 40. Constance went 3rd in the line, behind McAllister and one of the estate gillies, ahead of the London men who had stopped arguing about the correct route once the argument became physically impractical. She moved without deliberating about her footing, her father's other lesson, the one he had never stated directly but had demonstrated across a decade of hills. Thought makes the body hesitant, and hesitation on a wet hillside is a separate and more serious problem than the one you are already managing. The birch trees thinned. The gully opened. He was at the bottom of it, sitting with his back against a pale granite boulder, one leg extended in front of him at an angle that communicated information before she reached him. He looked up at the sound of their descent without startlement. He had been waiting, not with the fidgeting impatience of a man unaccustomed to stillness, but with the quality of a man who has assessed his situation, determined his options, and is now engaged in the one available to him. She had not had a clear expectation of what he would look like. She corrected for this, filed it, moved toward the ankle. He was at the bottom of the gully, sitting up, which was the first good sign. The second was that he had not moved. Constance knelt beside the extended leg and took in the full picture before touching anything. The right boot had been cut open at the ankle with a hunting knife. His own, she noted, still lying in the moss nearby. The swelling already building above the joint in the specific way that indicated soft tissue damage, the skin stretched and beginning to mottle. The angle of the foot relative to the lower leg suggested the lateral ligaments. Possibly a crack at the distal fibula. She would not know the second thing without palpation, and she would not palpate without asking. "May I?" It arrived as something between a question and a statement. He regarded her with the expression of a man encountering an unexpected variable and taking his time with it. "You may," he said. She pressed, carefully, with the full attention her father had taught her to give an injury. The shape of the swelling, the architecture of the bone beneath her thumb, the small involuntary contractions of the surrounding muscle. He made no sound. She noted this. A man in shock makes different sounds from a man who has been sitting with pain for several hours and has arrived at an arrangement with it. The second kind of silence was the better kind. "Ligament damage," she said. "The lateral complex. Possibly a fracture at the lower fibula, but the bone's line feels intact. We'll need a stretcher for the ascent, or you'll worsen it." "I had reached that conclusion," he said. Dry, not unkind. He said it the way a man states an agreement with a practical assessment, which was different from the way men usually received her practical assessments. She sat back on her heels and began laying out the materials for a field binding. The strips of heavy linen were at the bottom of her father's kit, where they had always been, rolled tight the way her father rolled them, which was to say tightly enough to be usable and loosely enough to unroll without fighting. McAllister was already dispatching 2 of the guards back up the gully for the stretcher from the estate house. The London men occupied themselves with the perimeter, which was where they would be most useful. "You saw the marker." She looked up. He was watching her with an attention that had a different quality from the attention she had received from the rest of the party. Not assessment. Something slower and more deliberate than assessment. "Yes," she said. "Where did you learn it?" "My father. He's head stalker." She returned to the binding. The knot at the ankle required precision. Too tight, and the compression would worsen the swelling. Too loose, and the joint had no support for the ascent. She had done this twice before, both times on estate workers, and the principle was the same regardless of the ankle's owner. "My father's stalker taught me that pattern before I was 8, he said. "I placed it because I didn't know if anyone here would remember it." He paused. "I didn't think anyone else would know it." The distance between them did something she could not immediately categorize. The angle of the ankle required her full attention. She gave it her full attention. One beat, then another. "It will hold for the ascent," she said when the binding was done. "Your full weight stays off it. The men will manage the rest." "Thank you, Miss Farrow," she said. "Constance Farrow." He repeated it with the same precision she had used, not echoing it, but confirming it the way one confirms a coordinate. She straightened and turned to assess the progress of the stretcher party on the gully's upper slope because something in the way he had confirmed her name was a more complicated problem than the ankle, and the ankle was the problem she had come here to manage. The stretcher arrived. He was carried up. She followed, and then, at the gully's edge where the path diverged, his toward the estate house, hers toward the cottage, she turned back. He watched her go. She did not look back to confirm this. She knew, the way you know anything about the terrain you have walked all your life, by the quality of the air behind you, by the particular silence that follows a gaze. He sent for her on the 3rd day, and she went, which was the first thing she would later call a mistake. The message came through the household steward, a small card, formally addressed, requesting that Miss Farrow attend the estate house at 2 o'clock to provide a briefing on hazardous terrain features in the southwest quarter of the estate, identified as inadequately mapped in the royal party's planning documentation. It was a reasonable pretext. She stood with the card in the kitchen for a moment, reading it a second time. Her mother watched her from the window above the sink. Well, her mother said, not a question. The Farrow family had always communicated most efficiently without questions. Constance put the card on the table and went to find her good coat. Mr. Holt, the equerry, received her in the entrance hall of the estate house. A trim, quiet-faced man who had the quality of a well-regulated clock in that he appeared to be conducting two tasks simultaneously at all times, both with equal and unhurried precision. He led her to a small sitting room on the ground floor where a fire had been lit recently enough that the room was warm, but the smell of the coal was still present, and where an ordnance survey map had been unrolled across a writing table and held flat at the corners with objects that had been chosen for the task with a certain pragmatic randomness. A letter opener, a pewter inkstand, a book about the botany of the Scottish uplands. She looked at the map. She heard the door open and the particular sound of cane on stone. Within 10 minutes of his arrival, Mr. Holt had found an errand elsewhere. The door closed. There's no briefing, he said. I apologize for the pretext. I assumed, she said. You assumed and came anyway. She had. She did not examine why at this particular moment, standing in a room with a map between them and a fire to her left and a man who had just confirmed what she had already known. They walked in a walled garden afterward, him with the cane on the stone path, her beside him at the correct distance, which she was aware of in the precise way she was aware of other measurable things. The dormant rose bushes ran in pairs along both walls. 11 pairs, she counted, wrapped in hessian against the cold, looking less like roses and more like small shrouded objects awaiting identification. The cane left regular marks in the gravel. She counted those too, the seconds between his questions and her answers. He asked about the forest. She told him. The drainage patterns after heavy rain. The routes the red deer preferred in the first hard frost. The specific places where the fog settled and the specific places further up where it cleared, not by rule but by the particular argument of terrain and wind that she had been observing since she could walk. He listened. This was not, in itself, unusual. People listened when you talked about things they needed. What was unusual was that he continued to listen past the point at which the information became practically useful. He asked questions that followed from the previous answers. He waited for the full answer before asking the next question. She had learned early that quality of attention had a price. She had not yet identified what he was paying. The hessian-wrapped roses. 11 pairs. The cane marks in the gravel at intervals of approximately 3 feet. The bare gray sky above the garden wall, which had the uniform flatness of a sky that intended to stay exactly as it was for the remainder of the afternoon. What would you do, he said, if you could do anything? I should like to study land management, she said. There is agricultural science that applies directly to estates like this, soil management, drainage engineering, the kind of systematic terrain work that would improve the estate considerably. And I have read what material I can obtain, but without formal no. He stopped walking. The afternoon light had gone the particular low gold that Balmoral produced in late autumn, the kind that made the stone walls look as though they were lit from within. I mean anything, not the practical version. Anything. She looked at the 11 pairs of hessian-wrapped roses. She had understood the question entirely. That was the difficulty. She had understood it, and she had no answer for it, because the question included her as its subject in a way that very few questions she had been asked in 26 years had included her, and the long absence of that version of the question had done something to her capacity to answer it. He waited. He did not soften the question or restate it in a more manageable form or offer her something to step into. He waited with the patience of a man for whom a question's weight was not a problem to be dissolved, but a property to be respected. Somewhere behind them a door opened and closed on a gust of wind. The map on the table inside would have shifted against its paperweights. I'll have to think about it, she said. Yes, he said. I imagine you will. She walked back to the cottage with the question inside her coat, which was where it stayed for the remainder of the afternoon, and through the supper she prepared, and through the evening she spent reading by the kitchen fire, and through the night, which was the first in several months she did not sleep well in. Lord Ashby arrived on a Tuesday, which was already a bad sign. Constance had seen him twice from the cottage window, once arriving in the carriage, once walking to the estate house with the quality of motion that characterized men who had been dispatched to resolve something. She had been watching estates long enough to recognize the type. Men whose specific function was to apply pressure to variables that had begun to behave in unscheduled ways. They always walked like that, as though the path had been pre-agreed, and the walking itself was a formality. The card from the household steward arrived the following morning. She was shown into Mr. Ferguson's office, not the sitting room, not the estate house's main rooms, but the estate office, which was where the business of management was conducted and which communicated something clearly by being the room she was brought to. A chair was offered. Tea was offered. She declined the tea. Mr. Ferguson was a decent man. The slight tension at the corners of his eyes acknowledged this, or rather acknowledged that he knew the difference between the thing he was about to do and the thing a decent man would do, and had made his peace with it, or was in the process of making it. The household has been most grateful for Miss Farrow's assistance during the prince's. I understand, she said. He paused, recalibrated, continued. The prince's recovery is progressing well. The estate staff have, of course, been. I understand completely, Mr. Ferguson. He looked at her with a relief that had shame running beneath it. She looked at the curtain behind him. The tassels ran in pairs across the pelmet. She counted 12 pairs, the far left one listing slightly. The thread at the attachment point thinned and pulling. She counted again. Still 12. Her father's position was mentioned. With the specific gentleness of a man delivering a message he did not compose. The estate valued the Farrow family's long service. The headstalker's contribution to the estate had always been recognized. The household trusted that the current circumstances would not, and here a pause, precisely placed, introduce any unnecessary difficulties. She stood. I'll be gone by Friday, she said. She walked back to the cottage in the way she walked when she was assembling herself. Chin first, because that was where the composure started, the angle of the jaw, the lift of it, not defiant but level. Then the shoulders. Then the hands flat and still at her sides. Her father had told her once that you could read anyone's interior state by which part of them went first, and she had applied this observation for 20 years to other people and occasionally, when necessary, to herself. The box was in the wardrobe. She set it on the bed. She stood looking at it for a moment. It was not a tragedy. She ran this assessment with the same precision she brought to terrain. She had not been asked to feel anything. She had felt things regardless, which was her own miscalculation, and miscalculations were corrected by adjusting her route and continuing. She had adjusted routes before. She knew the method, the box, the packing, the morning coach. She opened the box and began. At the bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief of her own that she had placed there several years ago and forgotten, was a second handkerchief, white linen annealed in navy thread, which she had found near the marker stones after the search party had descended and had put in her pocket without thinking about it, and taken home without thinking about it, and placed in the box also without thinking about it, which was either carelessness or something she was not prepared to name. She folded it again, precisely along its own crease lines, set it at the top of the box. The box would go first. Then she would go. The trap was already loaded when she heard the gate. She had been up since 5. November dark had not finished lifting. The birch trees at the garden's edge were still black shapes against the sky that had achieved gray, but not yet light. Her bag stood beside the door. Her father sat in the kitchen with his tea and said nothing, which was how he expressed most of his strongly held positions. The gate's latch, footsteps on the path, the specific sound of weight being managed over uneven ground, the rhythm of it slightly uneven, the cane finding purchase on frost-stiff stones. She opened the door before he reached it. He looked at her. He looked at the bag. I'm not here in any official capacity, he said. Lord Ashby has not been informed. "I know," she said. "You'd have sent a card." Almost a smile. "I have spoken with Ashby," he said. "My position on the matter is clear to him. What is less clear to me is yours." The sky in the east had begun its first pale shift. Not gold yet, not anything yet, just the slow subtraction of darkness that preceded the actual arrival of morning by a margin that could feel deceptive. She had watched this particular sky from this particular gate for 26 years. She told him why she had decided to leave. Not with emotion. The conversation was too precise for emotion, and she had always done her clearest thinking when the stakes were high enough to require it. She told him as she would describe terrain. Here is the gradient. Here is what it costs you. Here is the recommended route. She said his position plainly. She said what her presence cost him. She said that she understood the arithmetic and that she had no quarrel with it because she had never been a woman who watched men pay her debts and called it love. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I know the cost. I've calculated it rather carefully over the past 3 days. The variable you haven't accounted for is that I have also calculated the other cost." She looked at the gate latch. Iron, cold under her palm, the kind of cold that came from metal that had been in contact with November air for hours. She had been holding it since she opened the door. Her father was very deliberately not visible in the kitchen window. "I'm not asking you to be rescued from anything," he said. "I'm asking whether you want to stay." The same question. The question from the garden, the one about wanting, the one she had never been asked. He had circled back to it, or perhaps had always been asking it. The same question through different surfaces like a marker stone that pointed in the same direction from every angle you approached it. She thought about the dormant roses in their hessian, about the way the estate looked in February when the snow came off the hills in a single day and the birches went from gray to green in what felt like an afternoon, about the question he had asked and the patience he had brought to the waiting and the fact that he had never, in any of it, asked her to perform a different version of herself, about what she wanted. 26 years. She let go of the latch. He did not step toward her. He stood in the gray morning with his cane and his entirely unofficial presence and waited in the manner of a man who has made his decision and is not going to apply it as a pressure. She reached back, set the bag inside the door. The gate was still open, both of them on one side of it. "I need to tell my father," she said. "Yes," he said. "Take as long as you need." She went back through the door and into the kitchen. Her father was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, holding his tea, not pretending he had not heard every word of a conversation conducted at entirely audible volume in his own garden. He looked at her. "Well," he said. She looked back at him, her father, who had taught her the markers and the terrain and the quality of attention and the order in which to assemble composure, and who had never told her which things she was allowed to want, because he had always operated on the assumption that she already knew. "Well," she said. She straightened her coat, went back through the hall, past the bag which stayed. Outside, through the kitchen window, she could see him waiting beside the gate in the thin early light. Not performing patience, simply patient in the way that certain fixed points on a landscape are patient, not actively waiting for you to arrive, simply present when you do. She had not chosen him. She was clear about this, at least to herself, because clarity was what she had always used in place of self-deception, and she was not going to abandon it now. She had not chosen him because he was a prince, or because he had remembered her name and her village and the shape of her knowledge. She had chosen the version of herself that decided she was allowed to want something, and that version had looked at the open gate and at the bag beside the door and at the man in the gray morning and had reached a conclusion, and the conclusion was quiet and certain in the way that terrain assessments were quiet and certain, which was to say without drama, without announcement, but with the full weight of everything observed behind it. Her father set down his tea, nodded once, the way he nodded at a route confirmed. A thing decided, no further review required. She walked out, across the frost-stiff grass, past the trap, to the gate. She stopped. She reached out and pulled the gate shut. They were on the same side of it. "I want to complete the terrain survey of the southwest quarter," she said. "The mapping is genuinely poor." "I'll have the ordnance maps pulled," he said. She nodded once. Route confirmed. The birch trees at the edge of the estate were showing their first pale gold at the tops, the morning having arrived while they were standing there. Not dramatically, but in the way that mornings at Balmoral arrived, which was steadily and without any particular interest in being noticed. She turned east, toward the forest where 3 white stones still sat in a V shape in the lee of a granite boulder, pointing downhill in a direction she had known all her life. He fell in a step beside her. She adjusted her pace without thinking about it. They walked into the morning together, and the gate behind them stayed closed, and the hills were exactly themselves, and the fog for once was lifting. A dense birch forest at Balmoral Estate in the Scottish Highlands. Mid-afternoon in late November, thick gray fog rolling between pale trunks and obscuring the path beyond 6 feet. A group of 8 to 10 men in Victorian hunting dress and palace livery stand clustered at a fork in the trail, their breath visible in the cold air, all facing north. The light is flat and diffuse, the fog softening every edge. Frost clings to the undergrowth. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of the same birch forest path, November fog. The men of the search party visible as muted shapes moving away into the gray distance. In the immediate foreground, 3 white quartz stones arranged in a narrow V shape in the dark soil, and brown leaf litter at the base of a birch root. The point of the V aimed east and downhill. The stones catch what little cold light penetrates the canopy. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman standing alone on a forest path at Balmoral in late November, dressed in a practical dark wool coat and sturdy leather boots, holding a worn canvas kit bag. She is approximately 26, with a precise, observant bearing, her weight distributed carefully on the sloped ground. She is watching the search party ahead of her, her expression giving nothing away, her eyes on the path they're taking rather than on the men themselves. Gray fog in the trees around her. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The interior of a gamekeeper's cottage on the Balmoral estate, early afternoon, gray November light through small leaded windows. A young woman in a dark wool coat is pulling on sturdy leather boots near the door. An older woman stands at the sink, her back slightly turned, the set of her shoulders communicating something without words. A worn canvas stalker's kit bag sits open on the kitchen table beside a coil of linen bandage. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a gamekeeper's canvas field kit laid open on a wooden kitchen table in a Highland cottage. Inside, rolled strips of heavy linen bandage, a short knife in a leather sheath, a small glass bottle, a folded paper, a length of cord. The kit has been used many times. The canvas is soft and darkened at the creases. Gray daylight through a small window. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A group of Victorian-era men moving in a line through dense birch forest on a hillside. Heavy November fog, reducing visibility to a few yards. At the front, a weathered Highland ghillie in dark tweed leads the way. Behind him, palace guards in livery and London household staff in overcoats move with varying degrees of confidence on the uneven ground. The path climbs slightly north and west away from the camera. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The same birch forest, same fog. The search party is visible as a loose group, all oriented north along the tree line. In the left foreground, 3 white quartz stones in a precise V shape in the leaf litter, the formation unmistakably deliberate, pointing east and downhill. The party has walked past them without stopping. The stones are in sharp focus. The men are soft and gray in the fog behind them. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman in a dark wool coat steps directly in front of a group of men on a foggy forest path at Balmoral. Her posture is level, her chin up, her hands at her sides. The men stop. The Highland ghillie at their front, is turning to look at her with an expression of careful patience. The London guards behind him have paused mid-stride. The fog is dense around them all. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a young woman's face in half-profile as she addresses a group of men on a misty Highland path. Her expression is specific and unhurried, the face of someone stating a fact rather than making a request. Her eyes are on the head ghillie in front of her. In the out-of-focus background, other men of the search party have stopped and turned. Cold flat light. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of 3 white quartz stones in the shape of a narrow V in dark forest soil at the base of a birch root, the point aimed downhill and east. A man's heavy boot is visible at the edge of the frame, having stopped approximately 14 inches from the stones. The stones are pale against the dark earth, unmistakably arranged by human hand. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The head ghillie of the Balmoral estate, a weathered man in his 50s in dark Highland tweed, stands on a forest path in November fog. He is looking east, having just turned from the young woman who addressed him. His expression communicates the decision of a man who has reassessed the situation and acted on the reassessment without visible drama. Behind him, a search party waits, also turned east. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A line of men descending a steep, fog-shrouded hillside path at Balmoral in late November. The head ghillie leads, followed by an estate ghillie, then a young woman in a dark wool coat moving with practiced confidence on the wet ground. Behind her, palace guards and London household staff navigate the slope with less certainty. The birch trees thin as the path drops. The fog is heavy. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A steep hillside path descending into a narrow Highland gully. Heavy November fog, the path wet and soft from recent rain. A young woman in a dark wool coat is third in a line of descending figures, her footing certain and unhesitant on the treacherous slope, her body weight forward in the way of someone who has walked this terrain many times. Bare birch branches on either side. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A rocky Highland gully at Balmoral in late November. Pale granite walls rising on both sides. The fog slightly thinner at the bottom where a small burn runs over gray stones. Birch and rowan saplings grow at the base of the cliff. The light is low and gray, the air cold and still. The gully has the quality of a space that has been unvisited for many hours. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A man in Victorian hunting dress sitting with his back against a large pale granite boulder at the bottom of a Highland gully, one leg extended before him, the right boot cut open at the ankle. He is approximately 30, with an upright bearing even in this position. His hunting jacket is dark tweed, slightly damp from the fog. He is looking upward at the sound of approaching footsteps, his expression calm and focused, a man who has been waiting and has not moved because moving would be foolish. A hunting knife lies in the moss beside him. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A closer view of Prince George seated against the granite boulder at the bottom of a Highland gully. His right leg is extended, boot cut away, the ankle visibly swollen and mottled above the cut leather. His bearing is controlled, his hands still. He is looking up at the group, now arriving in the gully below the fog line. His expression one of relief, contained by the composure of a man who does not intend to show what the last several hours have cost him. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman kneeling in a Highland gully beside an injured man's extended leg, her dark wool coat spread around her on the cold ground. Her attention is entirely on the ankle before her, both hands poised above it with a careful, diagnostic stillness. The injured man is visible from the waist down only. Dark tweed trousers, the cut boot, the swollen ankle. Around them, men of a search party stand at a slight distance. Flat gray light. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a young woman's hands assessing an injured ankle in a Highland gully. Her fingers are placed precisely along the outer edge of the swollen joint. The hands are steady, the touch deliberate. The cut leather of the boot is visible at the frame's edge. Brown leaf litter and gray moss beneath. Cold, flat natural light. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A two-shot in a Highland gully. Prince George sits against a pale boulder, looking down at a young woman kneeling beside his leg. He is speaking. She is focused on the ankle, not looking up at him. Between them is the particular quality of attention that comes when one person is being assessed and the other is doing the assessing, and both know it. The fog is lifting very slightly above the gully's lip. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A wide view of the Corey B. Gully with the search party now gathered at its base. Two palace guards in livery are beginning to make their way back up the slope toward the estate. The head gilly stands apart, watching the young woman continue her work. Prince George remains against the boulder. The fog above the gully is the color of iron. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman in a Highland gully laying out medical field supplies on the ground. Rolled strips of white linen bandage, a small glass bottle, a short length of cord. She is seated beside an injured man, working with methodical precision, her materials arranged in the order of their use. The contents of an open canvas kit bag are visible. Gray light, cold air visible in the breath. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George seated against a granite boulder in a Highland gully, watching a young woman begin to apply a field binding to his ankle. His expression has changed slightly, something quieter in it, observational. He is no longer assessing the situation for practical purposes. He is watching her. She is not watching him. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a young woman's hands wrapping linen bandage around an injured ankle with careful, even tension. The bandage is being applied in the precise layered technique of someone who has done this before. The light is flat and gray. The man's trouser hem is visible above the bandage. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George in a Highland gully, speaking to a young woman who is working on his ankle. His posture against the boulder is controlled and attentive. He has asked a question. She has looked up to answer it. Their faces are level for the first time, the kneeling woman and the sitting man. Between them, the cold November air of the gully. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A Highland gully. Prince George and a young woman, a close two-shot. He has just said something that has caused a very small change in the air between them. She is looking at him directly for the first time since entering the gully. His expression is neither warm nor cool, but exact, the face of a man who has said what he meant and is waiting to see what it does. The fog is pale behind his shoulder. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a young woman's face in a Highland gully as she receives information she did not expect. Her expression is contained, giving nothing away outwardly, but there's a slight adjustment, a quality of attention altered. She is looking at the man in front of her. A moment of stillness before she returns to the work in her hands. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman completing a field bandage on a man's ankle in a Highland gully. She is tying off the final knot with precise, practiced movements. The binding is done. She is about to speak. The injured man watches her. The search party waits at a respectful distance behind her. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Two figures in a Highland gully. Prince George seated against his boulder, a young woman upright before him. He is speaking her name back to her. The expression on his face is one of careful confirmation. She is turning, already looking toward the gully's upper slope where the stretcher party is beginning its descent through the fog. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A stretcher being carried down a steep highland slope through November fog by two palace guards and an estate gilly. The birch trees part where the path widens near the gully floor. The stretcher is a simple estate model, canvas on a wooden frame. The men carrying it are focused on the footing. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George being helped from the ground in the Corey B. Gully, supported by 2 palace guards and McAllister the head ghillie. His bearing is upright despite the injury. He takes no more assistance than is necessary and does not perform gratitude or distress. The young woman stands slightly apart, watching to ensure the transfer is managed correctly. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George being settled onto a canvas stretcher at the bottom of a Highland gully. He is lying with controlled stillness, his injured leg stabilized. The guards preparing to lift the stretcher. The fog above the gully has lightened slightly, the pale sky visible at the rim. A young woman in a dark wool coat stands to one side, her role complete. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A group ascending a steep highland path in November fog, carrying a stretcher. The head ghillie leads, 2 guards carry the stretcher with the injured man, the other members of the search party follow. The path climbs steeply, the birch forest closing in on either side. Pale gray light. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A fork in a highland path above the Corey B. Gully in late afternoon fog. 2 tracks diverge, one toward a large stone estate house visible through the trees in the middle distance, one toward a smaller stone cottage downhill. A young woman in a dark wool coat stands at the fork. The stretcher party has gone toward the estate. She is turning in the other direction. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A rear view of a young woman in a dark wool coat walking alone downhill on a foggy highland path toward a gamekeeper's cottage. She moves with her previous economy of stride, unhurried but purposeful. The fog is thickening again as the light fails. The cottage's single-lit window is visible through the birch trees ahead. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A wide view from the elevation of the Highland Estate house, looking down through thinning fog at a figure in a dark wool coat descending the hillside path. The gamekeeper's cottage is visible in the lower distance, smoke from its chimney rising straight in the still November air. The man watching from the elevated position is not visible in frame, only the perspective of the watching, communicated through the composition. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The interior of the Balmoral gamekeeper's cottage, early afternoon, 3 days after the rescue. A small white card lies on a wooden kitchen table, a formal household card with handwritten text. A young woman stands beside the table looking at it. Through the window behind her, bare birch trees and a gray sky. The kitchen is orderly and modest, a black range, dark wood, practical objects. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a formal household card on a wooden kitchen table. The card bears a crest at the top and a brief handwritten request for attendance. Beside the card, a woman's hand has set down a small glass of water. The table's surface shows the marks of long use. Natural gray light from a window to the left. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. An older woman at a kitchen sink in a Highland cottage, her back to the room, her hands occupied with a task. The set of her shoulders communicates reserved attention to everything happening behind her without turning to show it. Through the window above the sink, bare November birch branches. The room is warm and close. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The entrance hall of the Balmoral Hunting Lodge, a formal stone interior with a wide staircase, dark wood paneling, and mounted antlers on the walls. A neatly dressed man in his 40s, the royal equerry, stands near the foot of the stairs, waiting. He has the quality of a man managing 2 conversations simultaneously, the visible one and the one he is conducting entirely in his own mind. Gaslight in the wall sconces, afternoon light from a high window. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A ground floor sitting room in the Balmoral Hunting Lodge, lit by a recently laid coal fire and afternoon light through tall windows. An ordnance survey map is unrolled on a writing table, held flat at the corners by a letter opener, a pewter inkstand, a botanical reference book, and a small brass candle holder. 2 chairs near the fire. The room is warm, the walls lined with bookshelves. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of the Ordnance Survey map on the writing table in the Balmoral sitting room. Detailed topographic lines. The southwest quarter of the estate marked in pencil, a stretch of the highland terrain rendered in the precise notation of Victorian cartography. The corners held by their pragmatic paperweights. The firelight moves across the paper surface. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George entering a sitting room at the Balmoral hunting lodge using a cane. He is in day dress, dark coat, waistcoat, pale cravat, rather than formal attire. His bearing is upright. The cane is used as a practical aid without ceremony. He is crossing toward the writing table where the map lies unrolled. The room is warm, firelit, bookshelved. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A sitting room at the Balmoral hunting lodge. The equerry is departing through a far door, his hand on the door handle. At the writing table in the room's center, a young woman in her good dark coat stands looking at the map. Prince George, cane in hand, stands near the fireplace. Neither's looking at the other. The fire burns. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The sitting room door closing. A close view of a carved wooden door in the Balmoral hunting lodge, the brass handle releasing as the latch engages. The room beyond the door is glimpsed only through the narrowing gap. A fire, a lamp, 2 figures. The latch clicks. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George and a young woman standing on opposite sides of a writing table in the Balmoral sitting room. The Ordnance Survey map between them. He is speaking. She is looking at the map. The fire behind them lights the room in warm gold against the gray afternoon outside the windows. The space between them is deliberate and correct, but the attention in the room is not divided. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A walled kitchen garden at Balmoral in late November. Stone walls on all 4 sides, the garden bare and dormant. Along both walls, rose bushes wrapped in Hessian sacking stand in pairs. 11 pairs in all. The wrap forms pale and cylindrical against the dark stone. A stone path runs between them. The sky above is flat gray. The air is cold and still. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George and a young woman walking side by side on a stone path in the walled garden at Balmoral. He uses a cane. She walks at his pace with an ease that is not performance. He is speaking. She is listening, her eyes moving between his face and the path ahead, the particular quality of someone fully present in a conversation. The dormant Hessian-wrapped rose bushes line the path. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a walking cane's rubber ferrule on a stone garden path, and the regular impression it makes in the fine gravel at the path's edge. The marks are spaced evenly, the pattern of a steady, considered pace. Frosted grass beyond the path's edge. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of Hessian-wrapped rose bushes in a Victorian walled garden in November, the burlap tied carefully at the base and crown, the forms anonymous and waiting. 2 in the frame, with the stone wall behind them. The wrapping is old and soft, darkened by previous seasons. Cold light. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George speaking in the walled garden at Balmoral, his profile to the camera. He is listening intently. He has just asked a question, and the answer is still in progress. His expression is attentive without urgency, the expression of a man who has learned to let a conversation arrive at its own pace. The cane is in his left hand, the garden wall pale behind him. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman walking in a walled garden beside a man using a cane, speaking about terrain in the way she knows it, fluently, from memory, from the ground up. Her posture is precise, but unself-conscious, her hands occasionally making small, indicating gestures. She is not performing this knowledge for anyone. The autumn garden is bare and cold around them. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Two people, a man with a cane and a young woman, standing still on a stone garden path in a Victorian walled garden. He has stopped walking, and so has she. The afternoon light has gone gold, low and long across the garden walls. He is asking a question. She is looking toward the line of wrapped rose bushes along the far wall. The moment has weight. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of 11 pairs of Hessian-wrapped rose bushes stretching along the stone wall of the Balmoral walled garden. The pale cylindrical forms receding in perspective toward the far corner. The light falls on them at a low winter angle. The garden is otherwise bare. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George and a young woman in a walled garden, standing at a short distance from each other. He has asked a second version of his question and is waiting. She is looking at the wrapped rose bushes, counting them or appearing to count them, giving her hands and eyes a task that is not the question. He is entirely still. The garden around them has gone golden and quiet. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman standing in a Victorian walled garden, her gaze on the middle distance. She is not looking at the man beside her. Her expression is precise and inward, the face of someone confronting an unexpected interior question with the same methodical attention she brings to practical problems. The gold November light falls across her coat. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A walled garden at Balmoral in late November from a high wide angle. Two small figures on the path. A man with a cane, a woman beside him. The garden is bare and formal, the wrapped rose bushes in their pairs along the walls, the stone path bisecting the space. The sky above the walls is pale gray. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A door at the far end of the Balmoral sitting room, seen from the garden path through tall windows. The door is opened slightly, caught in a gust of wind. Inside, barely visible, the Ordnance Survey map on the table has shifted at one corner. The lamplight flickers. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a woman's profile in a walled garden, her breath briefly visible in the cold air. She is speaking a short sentence. I'll have to think about it. And her expression is neither dismissal nor evasion, but the face of someone being entirely honest about a difficulty. The gold light, the cold air, realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A rear view of a young woman walking away from the walled garden along a path toward the Balmoral gamekeeper's cottage. Late afternoon light long on her back. She is walking with the same steady pace as before, but there is something she is carrying now that was not there before. The garden gate behind her. The hillside path ahead. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The interior of the gamekeeper's cottage, evening. A young woman sits in a chair by the kitchen range, a book open in her lap, but she is not reading. Her eyes are on the fire. The book's pages are still. The range ticks as the coals settle. One oil lamp on the table. The room is warm. She is not sleeping. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The exterior of Balmoral Estate in late November, seen from the gamekeeper's cottage path. A formal carriage approaches along the estate drive in the gray afternoon light. A black closed carriage with the royal cipher on the door, drawn by matched dark horses. The trees on either side of the drive are bare and fog-rimmed. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view through a gamekeeper's cottage window of the distant Balmoral Estate drive. A man in a dark city overcoat is walking from the parked carriage toward the estate house. Lord Ashby. His walk has the quality of a man who has been dispatched to resolve something and considers the matter already half resolved. The window glass gives the view a slight distortion. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The interior of an estate manager's office in a Victorian hunting lodge. Dark wood walls, a plain desk, one window overlooking a kitchen yard. The room communicates function rather than status. Two chairs face the desk. On the desk, a neat stack of papers and a tea service, 2 cups, which has just been laid. Gray light from the window. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small formal household card being carried on a tray to the door of a gamekeeper's cottage in Victorian Scotland. The card bears a crest and a brief handwritten message. The doorstep is stone, the doorway framed in rough-cut granite. Gray morning light. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman walking across the Balmoral grounds in the direction of the estate house. A gray late November morning. She is wearing her good dark coat. Her pace is steady and direct. The gravel drive, the bare trees, the stone of the estate house visible ahead through thin fog. Her posture is level and composed. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A Victorian estate office. A man in his 50s, the household steward, neatly dressed, with an expression of careful decency, sits behind a plain desk. Opposite him, a chair in which a young woman is seated upright, her coat still on, her hands in her lap. She has declined the tea. He is beginning to speak. The window behind him looks out on a gray service yard. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a tea service in a Victorian estate office. 2 white china cups and saucers, a small teapot, a sugar bowl. One cup has been filled. The other has not. The tray is on the corner of the desk. The untouched cup communicates everything about the room's balance of power in a domestic Victorian register. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a Victorian steward's face as he speaks a difficult message with professional composure. His expression shows the slight tension of a decent man doing an indecent errand. His eyes are on the woman across the desk. His hands are still on the desk surface. The window light is gray and flat. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Window curtains in a Victorian estate office. Heavy burgundy wool with a deep pelmet, the tassels running in pairs. A close view of the pelmet's fringe. 12 pairs of tassels. The far left one slightly askew, its attachment thread thinned and pulling the tassel leaning slightly to the side. The rest hang with military evenness. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a single curtain tassel in a Victorian office, slightly askew from its pair, listing at perhaps 15 degrees from vertical. The thread attaching it is frayed. The tassel itself is entirely ordinary, a burgundy wool fringe, except for this small imperfection, which the eye finds immediately. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman rising from a chair in a Victorian estate office. She is fully upright, her bearing composed and level. The steward across the desk is still seated, his expression unable to entirely conceal his relief mixed with shame. She is speaking a single direct sentence. The room is quiet and gray. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A rear view of a young woman walking across the Balmoral estate grounds, away from the Stone Lodge building and toward the distant gamekeeper's cottage. Late morning, gray light, bare grounds. Her pace is steady. Her posture is being assembled in the particular, deliberate way of someone arranging composure piece by piece. Chin level, shoulders settled, hands still. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The exterior of the gamekeeper's cottage at Balmoral, seen from the path. A young woman in a dark wool coat is pushing open the cottage door. The grounds are still and gray around her. Her shadow falls long on the stone step. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The interior of a Victorian gamekeeper's cottage bedroom. spare, orderly, whitewashed walls, a narrow bed with a dark wool coverlet, a small window with a view of birch trees. A wardrobe stands against the far wall, its door slightly ajar. A woman is standing before it, looking at it. The room is still. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a travel box being lifted from the interior of a Victorian wardrobe. The box is modest and well-made, dark leather over wood, the corners reinforced with brass. The woman's hands grip its sides as she lifts it. The wardrobe interior behind it shows neatly folded clothes, a hat on the upper shelf. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A Victorian travel box, placed open on a narrow bed in a gamekeeper's cottage bedroom. The box is half-packed, a folded dress, a small bundle of correspondence tied with tape, a hairbrush. The remainder of the room is visible, spare, clean, the windows showing bare birch trees and a gray sky. A woman's hand is in the frame, placing a folded item into the box. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of the interior of a Victorian travel box, nearly packed. At the very bottom, barely visible under the other contents, a white linen handkerchief. Not the one that belongs to the box's owner. This one is crisper, whiter, annealed in navy thread. A woman's hand has found it. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a white linen handkerchief with an embroidered monogram in navy blue thread, held in a young woman's hands. She is unfolding it along its original crease lines in a Victorian cottage bedroom. The handkerchief is fine linen, laundered and pressed. Its presence in her box is unexplained and explaining itself. Gray window light. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman seated on the edge of a narrow bed in a Victorian cottage, holding a white handkerchief in both hands. She is looking at it, not with sentiment, but with the focused attention of someone categorizing information. The open travel box is beside her. The window is gray. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of the white handkerchief being refolded along its crease lines with careful, exact movements. The monogram visible in the fold, a G worked in navy thread. The woman's hands are steady. The refolding is precise. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The open travel box on the bed in the cottage bedroom. The white handkerchief placed at the very top of the packed contents, visible and deliberate. The rest of the box's contents are below it. A woman's hand withdraws from the frame. The morning light through the window is the same gray it has been all day. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A Victorian gamekeeper's cottage kitchen at 5 o'clock in the morning before true dawn. A single oil lamp on the kitchen table throws warm light against the dark windows. A woman in a dark coat stands near the door, a travel bag at her feet. The kitchen is familiar and ordinary around her. The black range, the pine table, a tea mug recently emptied. The window above the sink shows nothing but darkness. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A small Victorian trap cart loaded for travel, standing in the yard outside a gamekeeper's cottage before dawn in November. A single horse stands in harness, patient and still, its breath a soft cloud in the cold, dark air. The yard is lit only by the light escaping from the cottage's kitchen window. The cart is simply loaded, one box, one bag. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. An older man, a Highland gamekeeper, weathered and broad-shouldered, in his late 50s, seated at a kitchen table with a mug of tea in the pre-dawn dark. He is not speaking. His presence in the chair communicates everything he has decided not to say. The lamplight falls on his hands around the mug. The kitchen is warm and still. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A stone garden gate in the grounds of a gamekeeper's cottage at Balmoral, early morning before dawn in November. The gate is iron, set in a low stone wall. The latch is lifting from outside. The path beyond the gate is gray dark. The kitchen window of the cottage glows warm behind it. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The cottage door opening from inside, a young woman framed in the doorway. Behind her, the warm lamplit kitchen. Before her, the cold, dark garden, and, at the garden gate, a figure, Prince George, standing in the pre-dawn gray with his cane. He has come without ceremony or escort. She is looking at him. He is looking at her. Then at the bag visible beside her legs. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George outside a gamekeeper's garden gate in the earliest gray of a November morning at Balmoral. He is in day dress, dark overcoat, holding a cane. He is standing with the stillness of a man who has decided where he is going to stand and is not going to move from it until the conversation is finished. No escort, no quiere. His breath is faintly visible in the cold air. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of Prince George's face in the gray pre-dawn light outside a garden gate. He has just said something. Not the opening of a prepared speech, but the first factual thing, that he is not here in an official capacity. His expression is open and exact without performance. The cold light is even on his face. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A two-shot. A young woman in the doorway of a cottage, a man with a cane at the garden gate. The distance between them is exactly the width of the garden path, the frosted grass, the gate. She has said something back to him. I know. You'd have sent a card. Neither is moving. The sky behind him is beginning to shift from black to dark gray. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of Prince George's face as a near smile crosses it briefly. The involuntary response to a precise observation delivered without sentiment. The expression lasts less than a second. He is containing it. The gray morning light. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The Balmoral grounds from behind the cottage garden wall. The sky to the east showing the very first pale gray of pre-dawn light along the ridge of the hills. The birch trees are still black shapes. The gamekeeper's cottage is lit from within. The estate house is a distant shape on the hillside in the dark. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman standing in a cottage doorway, speaking clearly and directly. She is explaining something difficult without emotion, laying out terms, not pleading. Her posture is composed, chin, shoulders, hands, assembled with the deliberate care of a woman who has needed to make herself steady by intention rather than by nature. The man at the gate listens. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a woman's hands at her sides, flat and still against the dark wool of her coat as she speaks. Not tight, not clenched, deliberately, practiced ly still in the way that denotes controlled interior effort. The stone doorstep beneath her boots. The cold air around her. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George at a garden gate in the gray November morning, listening. He is entirely still. He is not filling silences or softening what is being said to him. His face shows the full attention of a man receiving difficult information without the instinct to manage it for the person delivering it. The cane in his hand. The gate between them. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of Prince George's face as he listens to a woman speak. He is receiving what she is saying without interrupting or reassuring. His expression has the quality of someone doing the difficult work of listening rather than preparing to respond, present in the listening rather than ahead of it. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George at a garden gate, having just finished speaking. His last statement has been made and released. He is not pressing it. He is standing with the expression of a man who has put everything on the table and is not going to put anything else on it. The rest, the whole rest, belongs to the woman in the doorway. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a woman's hand on an iron garden gate latch. Her palm is against the cold metal, her fingers curled around it, not gripping it with tension, but holding it in the way of someone managing the point of exit. The latch is a simple Victorian iron tongue-in keeper, dark with age and cold to the touch. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A Victorian cottage kitchen interior scene through a window from outside. Inside, an older man stands in the doorway to the hall with a mug of tea, deliberately not looking out the window. He is being very carefully invisible. The lamp on the table behind him. The warm, known, ordinary kitchen. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A wide view of a gamekeeper's cottage garden in the pre-dawn gray, early November. The garden gate is between two stone walls. A young woman stands in the doorway of the cottage. A man with a cane stands at the gate. The sky is very slightly lighter in the east. The frost on the grass catches what little light there is. Both figures are still. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a young woman's face as she is in the process of deciding something. Not deciding outwardly, but the interior work of it visible in the slight stillness of her expression, the way her focus has gone inward for a moment. She is looking toward the man at the gate, but not seeing the gate or the man. She is seeing something inside. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The walled garden at Balmoral in November. A brief interior vision. The 11 pairs of Hessian-wrapped rose bushes, the stone path, the low gold afternoon light. This is how it looks when she remembers it. Quiet, specific, not romantic, practical, the kind of thing you would miss. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The same walled garden in February imagination. The snow off the hills, a dusting of it still on the top of the stone walls. The rose bushes wrapping, just being removed, the first bare red-brown, canes showing beneath. Pale winter sun, the specific quality of a Balmoral morning when the season is about to change. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of the iron garden gate latch. A woman's hand releases it, the fingers uncurling from the metal, the palm withdrawing. The latch stays in the resting position. The hand is now free. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George at the garden gate, watching a woman reach back and set her travel bag inside the cottage door. He has not stepped toward her. He is exactly where he was. The patience of his posture is not performance. It is the physical expression of a man who has decided the outcome belongs to the person in front of him, not to him. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a travel bag being set back inside a cottage doorway. A woman's hands release the bag's handle. The bag sits on a flagstone floor inside the door. The door is still open. The cold air from outside is in the frame. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The garden gate still standing open. A young woman and Prince George both on the same side of it, the cottage side. She has not yet turned back to him. He is standing still. The open gate behind them. The pale gray sky beginning to lighten east. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A two-shot. A young woman and Prince George in the cold early morning of a Balmoral garden. She is speaking, "I need to tell my father." Her tone is matter of fact. He is responding, "Yes. Take as long as you need." Neither is dramatically positioned. Both are standing in the ordinary gravity of a moment that is actually happening. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The interior of the gamekeeper's cottage, seen from the kitchen doorway. A young woman has just come back inside. She is standing in the hall, her coat still on. Her father is in the kitchen doorway with his tea mug, looking at her. He has heard everything. He is not asking anything. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of an older gamekeeper's face as he looks at his daughter. An expression of the specific Highland restraint that holds most of what it means within its edges. He is registering everything without deploying it. His mug of tea is in his hands. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A kitchen interior. A young woman and her father facing each other across the short distance of the cottage kitchen. He has said well. She has said well. Both single-syllable acknowledgments of a route confirmed. The lamp on the table between them. The range behind her. The gray window behind him. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a woman's hands adjusting her coat collar, standing in a cottage hall. A small, practical gesture that is also the final act of composition, the last point in the sequence of chin, shoulders, hands. The hands are steady. The coat is already on. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman walking through a cottage hall past a travel bag that is sitting on the flagstone floor inside the doorway. She passes it without stopping. Her stride does not change. The bag stays. The door is ahead of her. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The gamekeeper's cottage kitchen window from outside. Early morning. Just enough light now for gray shapes. Through the glass, the older man is visible at the kitchen table, and the woman has just left the frame. Outside the window, frost on the grass, the pale early sky, and Prince George waiting by the gate. A still figure gains breath in the cold air. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman walking out of a cottage door and across frost-stiffened grass toward a garden gate in the early morning at Balmoral. The sky to the east is beginning to go from gray to pale gold at the ridgeline. She is walking without adjusting her pace or her posture, without rehearsal. The gate is ahead of her. The man with the cane is at the gate. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a young woman's boots on frosted grass as she walks. The frost is crushed under each step, the impressions left behind in the silver-gray grass. Her pace is even. The cold air carries no wind. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman stopping at a garden gate in the early morning at Balmoral. She is one pace from a gate. Prince George is on the same side of it. He has stepped through. She is looking at the gate. He is looking at her. The sky has begun to show its first gold above the hills to the east. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of a young woman's hands reaching for an open garden gate, gripping the iron, and pulling it closed. The gate swings smoothly. The latch settles. Both people are on the same side. Her hands release the iron. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The garden gate closed. Both figures, a young woman and Prince George with his cane, standing on the cottage side of it. Neither is speaking. The gate is simply closed. The sky above them is the pale amber gray of a Scottish dawn just arriving. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A two-shot, the garden gate behind both figures. The young woman has just spoken. I want to complete the terrain survey of the southwest quarter. The mapping is genuinely poor. She is looking at him with the same practical directness she uses for all terrain assessments. He has a faint response on his face, the understanding that this is exactly who she is, and that is entirely correct. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. Prince George in the Balmoral garden at dawn, standing with his cane, responding, I'll have the ordnance maps pulled. He says it as he would say any practical thing, without decoration. His face shows no relief, no triumph, no sentimentality. Only the acknowledgement of a route now confirmed. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A young woman in a garden making one small nod. The confirming nod, the route-established nod, the gesture that means the same thing it has always meant in this family. Decided, proceed. Her chin level, her face composed, her eyes on the hills east of the estate. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The birch trees at the edge of the Balmoral estate showing their first gold of the morning at the top branches, the sunlight catching the highest tips before it reaches the ground. Below, the trunks are still gray. The sky above is pale amber and white. The frost on the undergrowth glitters. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A wide view of the Balmoral estate in the earliest true light of a November morning. The hills to the east are lit at the ridgeline. the snow cap just beginning to catch the light. Below, the estate in gray gold, the lodge, the gardens, the cottage, the birch forest, the paths. A small figure turns toward the east-facing path that leads toward the forest. Another figure falls into step beside her. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A rear view of two people walking side by side on a path at Balmoral in early morning light. A young woman and Prince George with his cane, their pace adjusted to each other without discussion. She is half a step ahead. He is a half step behind and to her right. They are walking east toward the birch forest. The morning light is golden and low behind them. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of two pairs of footprints in frost-covered grass. A woman's boot prints, regular and direct, and beside them the marks of a cane, and a slightly uneven pair of footprints. The marks are side by side, heading east. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The garden gate behind them, closed. Just the gate in the early morning light. An ordinary iron gate in a stone wall, latched. The cottage behind it. The path ahead of it. The gate is unremarkable and entirely significant. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The birch forest at the edge of the Balmoral estate. Early morning, the November light filtering through the bare branches in long pale shafts. The path leads east through the thinning trees toward the open hillside. The frost on the ground is still undisturbed ahead. The forest is quiet. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. The path descending toward the Corey B Gully, seen from a distance in the early morning light. The landscape is gold and silver. Frost on the heather, low sun on the hillside, bare birch trees, the pale granite of the rocks below. Two small figures are visible on the path, walking east together into the morning. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England. A close view of the Corey B Gully floor in early morning winter light. Three white quartz stones in a V shape, arranged in the dark soil, and brown leaf litter at the base of a birch root. They are as they were left, undisturbed, the point of the V still aimed east and downhill. The morning frost has settled lightly on their surfaces. They are small and deliberate and completely themselves. Realistic photograph style, cinematic lighting, Victorian England.